report for 2026. I am going to shut off my camera. I just wanted to make introductions, but I have some connectivity issues, so it's better if my camera. But I'm Linda Fox. I'm the program manager. Jessica Gerhow is also here, and she's going to manage slides. So sorry. Can you hear me again? Yes. Okay, cool. Okay. So this report analyzes pharmaceutical pricing and utilization trends using 2025 data that was collected through the Nevada Drug Transparency Program. And we're going to go through each of the charts and graphs from the report. And by the way, that report is being posted probably now, like in the next few hours, it'll be posted. I apologize for that. It's kind of funny to present it before it's posted. That we just had a couple of stumbles. So we're going to start with public comment. Members, so this first public comment is intended for things specifically addressed on the agenda. Members of the public may make oral comments at this meeting. The comments may be limited to 3 minutes per person. Persons making comments will be asked to begin by stating their name for the record and to spell their last name. Public comment is limited to comments on items on the agenda. No action may be taken upon a matter raised under the public comment period unless the matter itself has been specifically included on an agenda as an action item. To provide public comment telephonically, dial 1-775-321-6111. When prompted to provide the meeting ID, enter 475-568-874 and pound. You may then press *5 to raise your hand during the public comment periods to provide your comment. Persons wishing to submit written testimony or documentary evidence may submit the material to the Drug Transparency Program at the listed drug transparency address, which is drugtransparency@nvha.nv.gov. Jessica, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so the key takeaway from the from the report, at a high level, this year shows a shift in pricing behavior, but not a reduction in cost pressure. So what I mean by that is fewer drugs met criteria for a significant price increase, but overall spending and cost per claim continued to rise. This reflects changes in manufacturer pricing strategies rather than changes in underlying cost drivers. So what does this program do? The program collects data from manufacturers, PBMs, wholesalers, and pharmaceutical representatives across the drug supply chain.
The goal is, are you here? Okay.
I'm back. I'm so sorry. The goal is to increase transparency, support policymakers, and to provide insight into drug pricing. So this program produces 3 key lists. It's a little funny because there's no list 1. So we start with list 2, but that's because we used to make a list 1 and it just went away a couple of years ago. So list 2 is the essential diabetes drugs list. List 3 is those same drugs that had a significant price increase. And list 4 is all of the other drugs that cost over $40 per course of therapy that also had a significant price increase. And the most notable and interesting thing this year was how small that list number 3 got. We'll talk about that when we get to the lists. Table 1 looks at Medicaid spending from 2017 through last year. So 2017 was when this program began. Total spending increased from about $428 million to over $1 billion in 2025. Over that time, the cost per claim is up over 65%, And if you compare that to medical CPI over that same time period, that was up 23%. Figure 1, the annual change in the average Medicaid prescription claim compared to the medical CPI. So we just put it in a graph here so you can visually see what it looked like each year. So this increase, the cost per claim increased steadily through 2023. So that would be the dark bar. It decreased slightly in 2024, and then it rose sharply again in 2025. And then the lighter bar you see there is medical CPI. So you can see it compared each year. And it's obvious the drug costs are outpacing inflation. And that's what I was hoping to display in this graph. So next we looked at the top 3 medications billed to Medicaid by spend. This looks at the last 3 years, and it hasn't changed much over the last 3 years. You can see Biktarvy appeared each year. Ozempic was there the last couple of years, and Kovaltry has been there each year. You can see the indication for those drugs in this table, but so Ozempic, probably we all know for diabetes, Biktarvy for HIV, and Kovaltry is to treat hemophilia. So you can see a small number of drugs continue to drive a large share of the total spend, and it's interesting over the years the drugs themselves have not changed much. Table 3 looks at the top 3 medications billed by volume. Again, that hasn't changed much. You can see in the past 3 years, atorvastatin was always there, so that's used to treat high cholesterol. Ibuprofen has been there every year, pain and inflammation. What did change was albuterol. An albuterol inhaler, to be specific, was there for the last 2 years, but excuse me, for 23 and 24, but this past year it was replaced by vitamin D. So utilization is driven by low-cost drugs, generic drugs, and spending is driven by high-cost specialty drugs. Table 4 shows us the drugs with a significant increase compared to medical CPI. This is where we saw the really sharp decline that I thought was so interesting. So if you look at year over year, it's 150, maybe 200 drugs that appeared on this list, and this past year it dropped to 12. And I included the CPI on this table because you might think, well, it dropped because the CPI changed, but you can see that's not the case. So if you look at 2022, the CPI was virtually very close to what it is this past year, but there were 144 drugs that reached threshold, and this past year only 12. So that's the most interesting change I saw in 2025. So what does this say about manufacturer behavior? The decline you see in Table 4 is driven by changes in manufacturer pricing behavior. Prior to 23, list number 3 commonly showed annual price increases of 3 to 7%. In recent years, manufacturers have shifted to tapering increases, price freezes, and in some cases, price decreases. 2 manufacturers reduced prices by 30 to 40%, eliminating prior cumulative inflationary effects and removing many products from threshold-based reporting lists. The reduction in reported price increases reflects strategic pricing decisions, not a reduction in underlying cost pressures. Table 5 looks at claims and cost by list by year. So we have list 2, 3, and 4 here. And again, list 2 is just diabetic meds. List 3 is diabetic meds with an increase, with a significant increase. And list 4 is all the other drugs that had an increase. But what is so interesting here, if you look at the bottom of list 3, the number of claims, only 19 claims. Keep in mind there were only 12 drugs, but only 19 claims on that list. That's quite striking. So table 6 is using that same information, but looking at an average cost per claim. You can see 2 and 3, the claims went up each year. List 4 is inconsistent, and simply because list 2 and 3 are always diabetic medications. List 4 is everything else, and the drugs that actually appeared on the list have changed every year. And so you can see it kind of goes up and down. The first year it was very, very high, and then low and high and low, and again this year it's high. So I don't know what can be gained from there because the drugs vary so wildly. But yeah, so it's worth sharing the information, but I don't have a conclusion from it. Figure 2 compares over $40 drugs by type. So this was just taking the list of drugs and what do they treat and put them in this pie chart. So the largest category here is either opiate medications or medications used to treat opiate addiction or opiate-induced constipation. So that represented 22% of those drugs that made it to list number 4. Figure 3 takes that same list, but then it looks at claims. So you can see the pie looks much different. But what I want to point out here is this list of drugs and claims is only about 9,000 claims out of over 7 million claims. So as far as looking at drugs that were on a Medicaid claim from list 4, it's only 0.12% of all claims, but within that group, 80% represented those drugs. So it is interesting. I'm not sure how much it means in the big picture because it's such a small segment of all claims, but I know it does look striking. Figure 4, the number of drugs with a WAC increase by year. These figures evaluate price changes across all drugs billed to Medicaid. So it's the actual number of drugs that experienced an increase. So any given year, perhaps there's 25,000 drugs approximately that are billed to Medicaid. And of those drugs, we looked at how many of them had a price increase. So this past year, it was just over 2,000. So this is looking at an actual number of drugs billed to Medicaid that had an increase. So this figure 5 takes that same number and looks at it as a percentage. So as the example I gave, there's a little over 2,000 that had an increase last year, and then I made that a percentage of how many were actually billed, and we came up with just a little over 8% of the drugs billed to Medicaid had an increase last year. And so then we compared that year over year. The bar next to it, the lighter bar, looks at, of those drugs that had an increase, what was their average increase? So for 2025, yeah, a little over 8% of those drugs had an increase, and their average increase was a little over 10%. Figure 6 looks at the aggregate manufacturer financial components. So manufacturers report to us, and we report in aggregate, but they tell us how much they spent on production costs, administrative costs, profit, patient assistance, et cetera. And you can see over the years, this looks quite different. Excuse me, I have just 2 years here. I have 24 and 25. But obviously, production cost, administrative cost, very, very high in 24. And it drops down lower in 25 quite significantly. I think an interesting note, because we've been asked this, is where does R&D, research and development, where does that fall? So that would fall under administrative cost. So yeah, you can see this did change between 24 and 25, and in 25, rebates is much higher. Consumer coupons just a little bit higher. Yeah, thank you, Jess. So price increase justifications. Manufacturers also report to us justifications for their increases, and they do it in 2 different ways. One is increases over the past 5 years, and that is any increase, and then increases that were high enough to meet statutory thresholds just for the past 2 years. So this is the first of those reports. This is any increase. The most common justification here was research and development, 18%. Inflation was pretty close behind, and also marketplace dynamics and drug comparative value also, all those are 16%. So the next slide, it looks fairly similar. So this one is drugs over the last 2 years, their justifications. And these were drugs that just met statutory, like it was a specific number they had to hit. It wasn't just because they had any increase. So the most common justification here was manufacturer cost at 22%. And across both of these figures, the types of justifications remained consistent. Table 7 is total rebates negotiated by PBMs with manufacturers. So I'm not going to go through the whole chart, but I just made some notes. PBMs reported approximately 210 million in rebates negotiated with manufacturers overall. About 70% of these were tied to commercial insurance, which indicates that most of the activity was in the commercial market. A smaller portion was attributed to Medicaid, and PBMs retained over 4% of total rebates. So we made a separate table for what PBMs reported rebates with pharmacies. This actually, the number was very close, 215 million. Again, most of the activity was in the commercial market. This is about 100 million. These vary across payer types and reflect the complexity of rebate structures. Table 9 shows us the pharmaceutical representative reporting over the past few years. This past year, representatives reported over 8 million in total compensation, and you can see it goes up fairly dramatically each year. The average compensation was approximately $22 per interaction. That doesn't really change that much. I can see it was a little lower in 23, but that doesn't change. But what the total number changes quite significantly, which just means they're feeding more people. About 94% of all the interactions were meal related. So other things might be education, honorarium, travel, but those things are very, well, they're about 6% or less. So most of them are meals, like feeding lunch at the office, etc. So these interactions remain low value, and this is consistent with previous years. So we broke down compensation by recipient type. So you can see down at the bottom, physicians, nurses, pharmacists, office staff is kind of a catch-all for if they don't fall into any other category. Office staff received the highest total compensation. And if you look across the past few years, I mean, it's really grown quite significantly, more than $1 million, increased more than $1 million. The average increased a little bit. The average cost increased a little bit as well, but not, I mean, it's pretty close to last year. It just increased from 23. Physicians have always received the highest average compensation, and that increased quite a bit this year, but they're not the highest spend, like this is a lower number of recipients there. But it's interesting, it goes up so significantly, and the biggest category where it's growing is office staff. So we also look at drug samples that are provided, and we break those down by what do they treat. So when drug reps bring samples to the office, they say what they brought and who they gave it to. So we looked at that, and again, that diabetes is the majority of samples that are provided at 18%. That has always been the case. It's not always been 18%, but it's always been the majority. And I can see that migraine is kind of a close second. Migraine, I don't know if it was 14% last year, but I know it was a close second last year as well. So this year, 13 wholesalers reported approximately 41 million in rebates to manufacturers and 38 million to pharmacies or PBMs. So we did get more than 13 wholesaler reports, but I only included here those that reported rebates. So many of them reported there were no rebates, and I did not include them in this report. So drug spending continues to outpace inflation. Cost per claim has increased significantly over time. Fewer drugs are triggering price increase thresholds. However, this reduction is driven by manufacturer pricing behavior, not a reduction in overall cost pressures. So it doesn't mean we're spending less. It just means there's less drugs causing that spending. Spending remains concentrated in high-cost specialty drugs, while high-volume drugs remain low-cost generics. Overall, the data suggests that while pricing strategies have shifted, the underlying cost drivers in the pharmaceutical market remain unchanged. This report is intended to improve transparency for policymakers, healthcare providers, and consumers. So there's another opportunity now for public comment. So if anybody would like to comment, you can either raise your hand here, or if you would like to telephonically comment, I'm going to repeat the number, 775-321-6111. When prompted to provide the meeting ID, enter 475-568-874 and pound. And you may press *5 to raise your hand during the public comment periods to provide your comment. And that is all I have. I appreciate your attendance, and Maddie or Jessica, do you see any comments? No. Okay, then I'm going to adjourn at this point. Thank you again. I appreciate your attendance. I hope everybody has a great day.